The cold morning air cut through Sarah Martinez's uniform as she stood in formation with 47 other recruits at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 120 pounds, she stood out among the towering figures around her. Most of the men were over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and thick arms. Sarah looked like a child next to them. "Look what we got here," whispered recruit Johnson, a former college football player from Texas. Somebody's little sister got lost on her way to cheerleading practice. The comment spread through the ranks like wildfire, causing quiet snickers and suppressed laughter. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw clenched tight. She had heard worse comments during her 4 years in the regular Navy, but this was different. This was SEAL training, the most elite program in the military. She had fought tooth and nail just to get the chance to be here, and she wasn't about to let anyone's words break her spirit. Instructor Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez noticed the disturbance and barked, "Something funny, recruits? Because if there is, I'd love to hear the joke, so we can all laugh together before we start today's fun activities." The formation fell silent immediately. Rodriguez was known for his creative punishment exercises, and nobody wanted to be on his bad side this early in the program. "Martinez!" Rodriguez called out, his voice echoing across the training ground. "Step forward." Sarah's heart pounded as she took 3 sharp steps forward and stood at attention. "Yes, Petty Officer. You think you belong here, Martinez?" Rodriguez circled her like a shark, his combat boots crunching on the gravel. "Yes, Petty Officer. These men think you're going to slow them down. They think you're going to get them killed in the field. What do you say to that?" Sarah could feel the eyes of every recruit burning into her back. She could hear Johnson's quiet chuckle behind her. "I say they should worry about themselves, Petty Officer." Rodriguez stopped directly in front of her, his face inches from hers. "We'll see about that. Drop and give me 50. The rest of you, since you found Martinez so entertaining, you can join her. 100 push-ups. Now." As 48 recruits dropped to the ground, Sarah could hear the groans and muttered curses directed at her. She had been in the program for exactly 12 minutes, and she had already made enemies. The weeks that followed were brutal beyond anything Sarah had imagined. The instructors pushed every recruit to their absolute limits, but it seemed like they pushed her even harder. During the 4-mile runs, she had to work twice as hard to keep up with the longer strides of her male counterparts. During log carries, she struggled under the weight that the bigger recruits handled with relative ease. "Martinez is going to DOR," Johnson said during chow one evening, using the military acronym for drop on request, the voluntary withdrawal from training. "She's holding back the whole class.
This is magical.
Give her another week,"
it?
added
Yes,
recruit
it truly
Thompson,
is.
a former Marine who stood 6 feet 6 inches tall. "She'll ring that bell and go crying back to her regular Navy job." The bell Johnson referenced sat in the center of the training compound. Any recruit who wanted to quit could ring it 3 times and walk away from the program forever. Sarah passed that bell dozens of times every day, and she could feel its presence calling to her during the most difficult moments. During water survival training, Sarah nearly drowned twice. Her smaller lung capacity made the underwater swimming exercises particularly challenging. The instructors had to pull her out of the pool, coughing and gasping for air while the other recruits looked on with a mixture of concern and irritation. "She's going to get someone killed," she heard Thompson whisper to Johnson as they filed out of the pool area. But Sarah had something the other recruits couldn't see. Every morning when she changed into her training uniform, she carefully positioned her undershirt to cover a tattoo that ran along her left shoulder blade. The tattoo was simple but meaningful, consisting of coordinates and a date that held deep personal significance. Her father, Master Chief Petty Officer Miguel Martinez, had been a Navy SEAL for 22 years before he was killed in action in Afghanistan when Sarah was 17 years old. The coordinates marked the exact location where his helicopter had gone down during a rescue mission. The date marked the day she had decided to follow in his footsteps, no matter what obstacles stood in her way. Miguel had trained Sarah from childhood, teaching her hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, and survival skills during their weekend camping trips. He had told her stories about SEAL training, about the brotherhood, about the honor of serving with the best warriors in the world. He had also warned her that the military was still changing, still learning to accept women in combat roles. Mija, he had said during one of their last conversations before his deployment, if you really want to be a SEAL, you're going to have to be 10 times better than everyone else just to be considered half as good. But I know you have a heart for it. I've seen it since you were little. Those words echoed in Sarah's mind during every painful moment of training. When the other recruits complained about her presence, when the instructors seemed to target her for extra punishment, when her body screamed for rest during the endless physical trials, she remembered her father's faith in her. The psychological pressure was often worse than the physical challenges. During mealtimes, conversations would stop when she sat down. During team exercises, she was often the last one chosen. In the barracks, the other recruits would talk around her, as if she wasn't there. I don't understand why they even let women try, Johnson said one evening, speaking loudly enough for Sarah to hear from her bunk. It's not about being sexist. It's about reality. The enemy doesn't care about political correctness. When bullets start flying, I want to know that the person next to me can carry me to safety if I get hit. She can't even carry the log properly, Thompson added. How is she going to carry a 200-pound SEAL in full gear? Sarah pulled her pillow over her head, but she couldn't block out the words. Doubt began creeping into her mind for the first time since training began. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was being selfish by taking a spot that could have gone to a man who was physically better suited for the job. But then she would touch the area where her tattoo lay hidden beneath her shirt, and she would remember why she was there. This wasn't just about proving herself to a bunch of recruits who had already made up their minds about her. This was about honoring her father's memory and continuing his legacy of service. The first major test came during Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous training with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep total. The instructors deliberately try to break down every recruit mentally and physically. It was during this week that most voluntary withdrawals occurred. On the third day, during a particularly brutal boat exercise in freezing ocean water, Sarah began to show signs of severe hypothermia. Her lips turned blue, her hands shook uncontrollably, and she could barely hold onto her paddle. The safety instructors were watching her closely, ready to pull her out of the exercise. Martinez is done. Johnson gasped between waves. Look at her. She's about to pass out. Even Thompson, who had been one of her harshest critics, looked concerned. Maybe she should sit this one out. But Sarah gritted her teeth and kept paddling. She focused on the rhythm, on the movement of her team, on anything except the cold that felt like knives stabbing into her bones. When they finally reached shore after 4 hours in the water, she collapsed onto the beach but refused medical attention. I'm fine, she insisted through chattering teeth. I can't continue. The training continued without pause. Equipment carries, obstacle courses, long-distance runs, and combat simulations blended together in an endless stream of exhaustion and pain. Sarah watched as recruit after recruit rang the bell and walked away from the program. The original class of 48 had shrunk to 31 by the end of Hell Week. But she was still there, still fighting, still proving that size and gender didn't determine heart and determination. Some of the recruits had begun to show her a grudging respect, though Johnson and Thompson remained openly hostile. The real test of her resolve came during the final week of the first phase of training. The instructors announced that each recruit would have to complete a solo navigation exercise through 20 miles of rough terrain while carrying a 60-pound pack. They would have 8 hours to complete the course, and anyone who failed would be immediately dropped from the program. Sarah knew this was her moment of truth. The pack weighed exactly half her body weight, and the mountainous terrain would challenge every ounce of strength and endurance she possessed. As she strapped on her gear and checked her compass, she could hear Johnson making bets with the other recruits about whether she would make it past the first checkpoint. But as Sarah set off into the wilderness alone, She wasn't thinking about Johnson or Thompson or any of the doubters. She was thinking about her father, about the coordinates tattooed on her shoulder, and about the promise she had made to herself to never give up on his dream. The solo navigation exercise pushed Sarah to her absolute limits. The 60-pound pack felt like it grew heavier with each step as she climbed through rocky terrain and dense forest. Her shoulders ached, her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she pressed forward. She had memorized every detail of the route during the briefing, calculating the most efficient path to each checkpoint. At the first checkpoint, she was surprised to find herself among the first 5 recruits to arrive. The instructor manning the station, Petty Officer Williams, raised an eyebrow as she approached. "Martinez, you're making good time," he said, checking her gear and marking her arrival time. "How are you feeling?" "Strong, Petty Officer," Sarah replied, though sweat poured down her face, and her breathing was labored. "Good. The next section is the hardest. Steep climbs and loose rock. Be careful." Sarah nodded and continued on. Behind her, she could hear other recruits arriving at the checkpoint, their heavy breathing and muttered complaints echoing through the trees. She pushed herself harder, determined to stay ahead of the pack. The second checkpoint was at the peak of a particularly challenging climb. Sarah's hands were bleeding from gripping sharp rocks, and her legs felt like they were made of concrete. But when she reached the top, she realized she was the first recruit to arrive. The instructor looked genuinely surprised. "Outstanding, Martinez. You're 30 minutes ahead of your nearest competitor." The words gave Sarah a surge of energy she didn't know she still possessed. For the first time since training began, she felt like she truly belonged here. She wasn't just keeping up anymore, she was leading. The final section of the course was a grueling descent through loose shale and thick vegetation. Several recruits had already been injured on this portion during previous training cycles. Sarah moved carefully but steadily, using techniques her father had taught her during their mountain climbing expeditions. When she finally crossed the finish line, she was shocked to learn that not only had she completed the course, but she had set a new record for the fastest time in over 2 years. The previous record had been held by a Marine Force recon operator who was 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds. Word of Sarah's performance spread quickly through the training compound. When the other recruits returned from their navigation exercises, they found her sitting quietly in the mess hall, studying manual procedures for the next phase of training. Johnson and Thompson sat down across from her, their earlier hostility replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "That was impressive out there, Martinez," Thompson said grudgingly. "I didn't think anyone could beat Rodriguez's record." "Rodriguez set that record?" Sarah asked, referring to their primary instructor. "Yeah, back when he was going through training. He's been bragging about it for 8 years. He's going to be pissed that a recruit broke it." But Rodriguez wasn't pissed. The next morning during formation, he called Sarah forward again. This time, however, his tone was different. "Martinez, yesterday you proved something important to this class and to the instructor staff. You proved that heart and determination can overcome physical disadvantages. You also proved that assumptions about capability based on appearance are often wrong." He turned to address the entire formation. "Some of you have been questioning whether Martinez belongs here. After yesterday's performance, I want to hear anyone who still has doubts speak up now." The formation remained silent. Even Johnson, who had been her most vocal critic, kept his mouth shut. "Outstanding. Now that we've settled that issue, we can move on to the next phase of training as a unified class." The second phase of training focused on combat skills and teamwork. Sarah excelled in marksmanship, often outscoring recruits who had been hunting since childhood. Her smaller size became an advantage during stealth exercises, allowing her to move through obstacles undetected while larger recruits struggled to find cover. During hand-to-hand combat training, Sarah surprised everyone by consistently defeating opponents who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. Years of training with her father had given her a solid foundation in martial arts, and She had continued studying combat techniques during her regular Navy service. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" asked recruit Davis after Sarah had thrown him to the mat for the third time in a row. "My dad taught me," Sarah replied, helping him to his feet. "He said size doesn't matter if you know how to use leverage and speed." "Your dad sounds like he knows what he's talking about. What does he do?" Sarah's expression darkened slightly. "He was a SEAL. He died in Afghanistan 5 years ago." The mood in the training circle shifted immediately. Several recruits exchanged glances suddenly, understanding why Sarah had been so determined to succeed despite the obstacles she faced. "I'm sorry," Davis said quietly. "I didn't know. It's okay. He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason I'll never quit." From that point forward, the dynamic within the class changed completely. The recruits began including Sarah in their conversations, asking her for advice on technique and treating her as an equal member of the team. Even Johnson, who had been her biggest detractor, began showing her respect. During team exercises, Sarah's tactical intelligence became apparent. She had an intuitive understanding of battlefield strategy that impressed the instructors. When her team was tasked with planning a mock rescue operation, Sarah's proposal was selected as the best among all the competing groups. "Martinez has the mind of a strategist," Instructor Rodriguez told his colleagues after reviewing the exercise results. "She sees angles that the other recruits miss. She's thinking 3 moves ahead while they're still figuring out their first move." But Sarah's most impressive moment came during a live-fire exercise that went wrong. The class was practicing room-clearing techniques when recruit Patterson accidentally triggered a malfunction in his rifle that caused it to discharge unexpectedly. The bullet ricocheted off a concrete wall and struck Johnson in the leg, causing him to collapse in pain. While the other recruits froze in shock, Sarah immediately took charge of the situation. She applied pressure to Johnson's wound, called for medical assistance, and organized the other recruits to secure the area and prevent further accidents. Her quick thinking and decisive action likely saved Johnson's life, as the bullet had nicked an artery and he was losing blood rapidly. "Martinez," Johnson gasped as the medics loaded him into an ambulance. "I owe you an apology. And probably my life. Just get better and come back to finish training," Sarah replied. "We need you on the team." The incident became a turning point in Sarah's relationship with the entire class. She had proven beyond any doubt that she belonged among them, not just as someone who could keep up, but as someone who could lead when leadership was needed. During the third phase of training, which focused on advanced combat techniques and specialized skills, Sarah continued to excel. She showed particular aptitude for underwater demolitions, long-range reconnaissance, and tactical communications. The instructors began discussing her performance in terms of potential specializations after graduation. But it was during a routine equipment inspection that something happened that would change everything. The recruits were required to strip down to their undershirts for a thorough examination of their gear. Sarah had always been careful to position her clothing to hide her tattoo, but on this particular day, Instructor Rodriguez noticed something unusual. "Martinez," he said, stepping closer to examine her shoulder. "What's that marking?" Sarah's heart stopped. She had been so careful for months, but a torn seam in her undershirt had shifted during the exercise, revealing a corner of her tattoo. "It's a tattoo, Petty Officer," she replied honestly. "I can see that. What does it say?" Sarah hesitated. Once Rodriguez saw the full tattoo, he would know everything about her background. She wasn't sure how he would react to learning that she was the daughter of a fallen SEAL, especially since she had never mentioned it in her official records. "Permission to speak privately, Petty Officer?" Rodriguez studied her face for a moment, recognizing the seriousness of her request. "Granted. My office, 5 minutes." As Sarah walked toward the instructor's building, she could feel the eyes of her fellow recruits following her. They had no idea what was happening, but they could sense that something important was about to unfold. Sarah touched the hidden tattoo beneath her shirt and thought about her father. After months of keeping his identity secret, she was about to reveal the truth about why she was really there. The coordinates tattooed on her shoulder weren't just numbers. They represented the exact location where Master Chief Petty Officer Miguel Martinez had made the ultimate sacrifice for his country. And now, Sarah was about to learn whether his legacy would help or hurt her chances of following in his footsteps. Rodriguez's office was small and functional, decorated with military awards, unit patches, and photographs of SEAL teams from various deployments. Sarah stood at attention while Rodriguez closed the door and moved to his desk. The tension in the room was thick as he gestured for her to sit down. At ease, Martinez. This conversation is off the record. Rodriguez pulled out a notepad and pen. Show me the tattoo. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then pulled her undershirt off her left shoulder, revealing the intricate tattoo that she had kept hidden for months. Rodriguez's eyes immediately focused on the coordinates and date, his expression growing more serious as he read the numbers. 34.0522 degrees north, 69.1657 degrees east. March 15, 2019. Rodriguez's voice was quiet as he read the tattoo aloud. Afghanistan, Wardak Province. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Rodriguez stared at the coordinates for a long moment, then walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. He flipped through several pages before stopping at a specific document. His face went pale as he read. Operation Neptune's Fury. SEAL Team 6 Rescue Mission. Master Chief Petty Officer Miguel Martinez. Rodriguez looked up at Sarah with new understanding. Miguel Martinez was your father. Yes, Petty Officer. Rodriguez sat down heavily in his chair, the weight of the revelation settling over him. Martinez, do you have any idea who I am? Sarah looked confused. You're my instructor, Petty Officer Rodriguez. Before I became instructor, I was operational for 12 years. I served with SEAL Team 6. Rodriguez opened another file and pulled out a photograph showing a group of SEALs in combat gear. Your father saved my life in Afghanistan. Twice. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the photograph. There was Rodriguez, 10 years younger and sporting a full beard, standing next to her father. Both men were smiling despite being in a war zone, their arms around each other's shoulders in the casual brotherhood that existed among SEALs. Miguel was the finest SEAL I ever served with, Rodriguez continued, his voice thick with emotion. When his helicopter went down during that rescue mission, we lost one of the best warriors this country has ever produced. The entire team was devastated. You were there when he died? Sarah asked quietly. I was supposed to be on that helicopter. Your father took my place because I had been injured during a previous operation. He said I needed another day to recover. Rodriguez's hands shook slightly as he held the photograph. If it wasn't for Miguel's decision, you'd be visiting my grave instead of his. The two sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about Miguel Martinez and his legacy. Finally, Rodriguez spoke again. Why didn't you tell anyone who you were? Why hide your identity? Sarah straightened in her chair. Because I wanted to earn my place here based on my own merit, not because of my father's reputation. I didn't want anyone to think I got special treatment or that I was riding on his name. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's exactly what Miguel would have said. He never wanted special treatment either, even though he deserved it. He paused, studying Sarah's face. But there's something else you need to know. There's been talk among the command staff about your performance. Sarah's heart sank. Bad talk. On the contrary, there's talk about fast-tracking you through advanced training. Your instructors believe you have the potential to be one of the best SEALs of your generation. Rodriguez leaned forward. But there's also concern about the attention your presence in the program has attracted. There are people in Washington who are watching your progress very closely. What kind of attention? The political kind. You're the first woman to make it this far in SEAL training without dropping out or being dropped for cause. There are politicians who want to use your success to advance their agendas, and others who want to see you fail to prove their points about women in combat roles. Rodriguez stood and walked to his window, looking out at the training ground where the other recruits were conducting equipment maintenance. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have a very special visitor. Commander Jake Sullivan, the commanding officer of SEAL Team 6, is coming to observe training. He specifically requested to see your performance. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Commander Sullivan had been her father's commanding officer and close friend. If he was coming to see her, it meant that word of her identity had already reached the highest levels of naval special warfare. Does he know who I am? I haven't told him, but Jake Sullivan is a smart man. Once he sees you perform, he'll figure it out. Miguel had very distinctive mannerisms and tactical approaches that he passed on to you. Anyone who served with him closely will recognize the similarities. Rodriguez returned to his desk and pulled out another document. Martinez, I need to ask you something important. Are you prepared for what comes next? If you graduate from this program, you're going to be under intense scrutiny for your entire career. Every mission, every success, every failure will be magnified because of what you represent. Sarah thought about the question seriously. She had known from the beginning that being the first woman SEAL would come with unique challenges, but she hadn't fully considered the political implications. Petty officer, my father died serving his country alongside the best warriors in the world. If I can honor his memory by becoming the kind of SEAL he was, then I'm willing to face whatever challenges come with that. Rodriguez smiled for the first time during their conversation. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, because I'm going to recommend that you be fast-tracked to Team 6 after graduation. Team 6? But that usually takes years of operational experience. Usually, yes, but you're not a usual case. Your tactical intelligence, leadership abilities, and psychological resilience are exceptional. Combined with your personal motivation and family legacy, you represent exactly the kind of operator that Team 6 needs. The next morning, the entire class assembled for what they thought would be a routine training exercise. But when a Black Hawk helicopter landed on the training ground and Commander Sullivan stepped out, everyone knew this was something special. Commander Sullivan was an imposing figure, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, with graying hair and intense blue eyes. He wore his dress uniform with a distinctive seal, trident prominently displayed, along with ribbons representing multiple combat deployments and commendations for valor. Class, attention! Rodriguez barked as Sullivan approached the formation. The recruits snapped to attention as Sullivan walked slowly down the line, examining each future SEAL with the practiced eye of a man who had led warriors in combat for over 20 years. When he reached Sarah, he paused for a long moment, studying her face intently. "Recruit Martinez," Sullivan said, his voice carrying easily across the training ground, "step forward." Sarah's heart pounded as she moved 3 steps forward and stood at attention. "Yes, sir." Sullivan circled her slowly, just as Rodriguez had done on her first day of training. But this time, there was no hostility or testing in his manner. Instead, there was something that looked almost like recognition. "Martinez, I understand you've been performing exceptionally well in training." "I've been doing my best, sir." "Your best has been quite impressive. Record-breaking navigation times, superior marksmanship scores, outstanding tactical leadership." Sullivan stopped directly in front of her. "Tell me, Martinez, what drives you to excel in this program?" Sarah felt the eyes of her entire class focused on her. This was the moment of truth. She could continue hiding her identity, or she could honor her father's memory by speaking honestly about her motivation. "Sir, my father taught me that being a SEAL isn't just about physical ability. It's about heart, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for your teammates and your country. I want to honor his memory by living up to the standards he set." Sullivan's expression softened slightly. "Your father sounds like a wise man. What was his name?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Master Chief Petty Officer Miguel Martinez, sir. SEAL Team 6. Killed in action, Afghanistan, March 15, 2019. The training ground fell completely silent. Commander Sullivan's face went through a range of emotions: surprise, recognition, sadness, and finally, something that looked like pride. "Miguel Martinez was one of the finest SEALs I ever had the honor to serve with," Sullivan said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent formation. He was a warrior, a leader, and a true patriot who gave his life to save others. Sullivan turned to address the entire class. Recruits, you have been training alongside the daughter of a fallen hero. Recruit Martinez has earned her place in this program through her own merit, but she also carries the legacy of one of our Brotherhood's greatest warriors. He turned back to Sarah, and for the first time during the exchange, he smiled. Your father would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished here. You have his tactical mind, his fighting spirit, and his unwavering determination. Sullivan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that gleamed in the morning sunlight. It was a sealed trident pin, worn and scratched from years of operational use. This trident belonged to your father. He asked me to keep it safe and to give it to someone worthy when the time was right. Sullivan pinned the trident to Sarah's uniform. Welcome to the Brotherhood, Seal Martinez. Your father is watching, and he's proud. As applause erupted from her fellow recruits and the instructor's staff, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She had finally achieved her father's dream, not as Miguel Martinez's daughter, but as Sarah Martinez, a seal in her own right. The coordinates tattooed on her shoulder would always remind her of the price her father paid for freedom, but now they also represented the beginning of her own legacy as a warrior in the greatest fighting force the world had ever known.